Good evening and welcome to DTV, Television for Democrats by Democrats, and about current issues of interest to Democrats in Knox County. Our show this evening will discuss election security and why voters should be confident in our elections, especially our local elections. My name is Luke Enan. I'm an attorney here in town, and I'm also chair of the Knox County Democratic Party Election Integrity Committee. Our panel this evening includes Chris Davis, our current Knox County Administrator of Elections, Cliff Rogers, our former Knox County Administrator of Elections, Tammy Keusius, a local attorney and a member of the Knox County Election Commission, and Frank Shingle, a former Knox County voting election technician. I just wanted to first kick it to the panel, and maybe Cliff, you can kind of give us an overview. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. The different election laws based on our different states, the way different counties run them differently. Can you just kind of give everybody an overview of how our voter system or election system is set up?
Yeah, and I think that's an important place to start because so all the viewers out there are clear, the laws are the same for the state of Tennessee in all 95 counties. So there's certain procedures that are in place pursuant to state law. For example, when ballots are brought back on election night in a vehicle, state law requires that we have a Democratic member and a Republican member in the car. It's just a security feature, so it doesn't look like somebody can tamper with votes, whether you're bringing in paper ballots or the mobile ballot boxes that we had on the machines. Where I think there's been a lot of confusion after this presidential election has to do with the fact that the state laws vary so much with, say, the counting of absentee ballots. Here in Tennessee, all ballots have to be in the Election Commission office by 8 p.m., basically when the polls close on election night, okay? If that ballot's not in there by then, we can't count it, and we get ballots always a day or so after the election. They can't be counted. On the other hand, some states will say if they're postmarked by a certain date, maybe it's election day, they can be received up to several days after that. So I can understand some of the confusion by people out there watching. It's like, well, our state's done. Why are these other states still counting it? Quite frankly, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I'm sure all of you had, I would like to see uniform laws dealing with absentee ballots. So all states, when we're talking about a presidential election, I think an argument can be made that maybe we need to have the same laws for all of those ballots, whatever they are, and we can debate and talk about what it should be. But I think it would eliminate a lot of confusion by people there that when their state's done, why are we still got votes dribbling in North Carolina or Wisconsin or wherever it is? And it increases their concern. And since all of these votes matter for that election, maybe there should be some uniformity. On the other hand, I don't really care, how Georgia conducts its elections for its state officials or how any other state does. That's up to them, but it's just something to think about. I just think there's a lot of confusion about that out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And it's not just things like absentee ballots, it's laws like voter ID. I know some states even have same-day registration where you can register to vote that day, and that certainly creates a backlog. But Chris, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how elections are conducted here on the local level, starting with, say, when a voter enters their precinct. What does that process look like?
Well, it's going to vary a little bit procedurally whether a voter votes early or he or she votes on election day. It's a little different in Tennessee. We'll just go early voting and start with that. Certainly, with early voting, one of the benefits and aspects of early voting, and in Tennessee, it's very uniform, as Cliff said, across all 95 counties, that you start early voting 20 days prior to any election, and you end it 5 days prior to any election. That's with the exception of the presidential primary, which is always 7 days prior. But essentially, it's 20 days to 5 days. And when the voter enters the polling place, The first thing he or she is going to do is have their photo ID ready. It's been a Tennessee law since 2012, I believe it is, Cliff, correct me if I'm wrong. And then in 2013, the law was changed slightly in Tennessee to not allow out-of-state driver's licenses. So in Tennessee, since 2013, it's had to be either it's photo ID issued by either the state of Tennessee or the federal government. But the voter will present his or her photo ID to what's called a registrar. And this happens early voting or election day. And the first step we're going to do is take that photo, because we don't care what the address is on the photo ID. It may not be where someone lived, but we're going to take that photo ID, and we're literally looking at the ID to determine, is the person who's presenting themselves to vote in front of me the same person that I'm looking at on this photo ID? That's what we use it for. Assuming that's the case, we then have to get the voter not registered because they're already registered to vote, but registered there in the polling place with an application for ballot, where they're literally applying to get a ballot to vote in that election. And we have to ascertain, based on the information we have and that they provide, is this person a registered voter? You know, in early voting, we use a computer. On election day, we have a book with all of the names of every voter in the precinct and whether or not that voter has voted early or attempted to vote absentee. But we literally have that voter fill out or complete what's called an application for ballot. Everybody listening to me who's been to vote will be familiar with this process, where you provide some basic information, including your name, your current address, date of birth, and then based on that information, along with your signature attesting to the fact that that is you, and that you know, you're there to present yourself to vote, we will then take that application for ballot. We'll send you over to a ballot table or a ballot machine, where we will hand you or issue you the ballot that's applicable for your current address. You will then take that ballot, and for the last two elections, both in August and November, we have in Knox County for the first time, I believe through 30 years, it's been at least that way in the last 30 years, we voted on some form of a machine. The primary way of voting now is voting on a paper ballot. So that person will take that paper ballot, they'll take their pen, they will go and complete that ballot, literally just filling in the circles, take that ballot. When they're done, review it. And that's your opportunity to review, are you happy with your choices? This is your proof that you're voting. People ask them quite often, well, can I get a receipt for this? Well, your receipt is literally that ballot that you're holding in your hand, because we keep these as I'm looking over at the screen here, Commissioner Kosius, but as election officials understand, we keep those ballots for a prescribed period of time post-election, so that if a lawsuit needs to be filed or a judge orders a recount, or there's some other irregularity that would necessitate having to get into those paper ballots, we'll keep those. But we'll take that paper ballot, the voter will take his or her paper ballot, they'll walk over to a scanner that has been programmed by one of my esteemed colleagues down here, Frank Shingle, and his compadre on the Republican side, Chuck Brantley. They'll feed that through the scanner. The vote will be recorded on a piece of media, but the paper ballot is the backup. And then at the end of early voting and on an election night, at the end of election night voting, we will then, with a prescribed set of standards and guidelines, we'll take those, like Cliff said, literally with a Republican and a Democrat in the car, and take those results down here to our headquarters and read that media off in a room full of people, Republicans and Democrats with eyes on it. And then from there, we'll take them on a computer that's not hooked up to the internet. We'll pull that media out, take it over to another computer that is hooked up to the internet, and then push those results out to the media and to our website. In a nutshell, that's it. I could answer 1,000 questions on that for you, Luke, but that's essentially it in a brief nutshell.
No, and I think that's helpful. And Frank, I just wanted to, and Tammy, you were revoked too, so I want to maybe pull out and do a larger overview with you. But Frank, you are somebody who's been in those rooms, who has worked on those machines. Can you just talk a little bit about that process and what voters can expect when after they cast their ballot?
Sure. LaRonda programs the ballot. She sends it to the state to get it certified. Then when she gets it back, she puts it on flash drives, essentially what they are. They are sent over to us. There's 4 of us, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. We work in a team, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. We start programming the various machines, and we check each other's work. There's never a Republican doing it by himself, or 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats. It's always 2, 1 of each. When we get through with them, we do what we call a private test. We make sure that the ballot works just like it's supposed to. And later on, a week or so later, Chris will designate a day and we will have a public test that the public's invited to come in, and they can pick out the machines and they can run the test with us and make sure that everything works perfectly. The warehouse is under 24/7 surveillance with cameras. There's only a handful of keys. The administrator, the assistant administrator, and the 4 techs have keys to it. As far as I know, that's the only keys there, and the PBA has one in case of emergencies. When we have put the flash drive in the slot for it.
Can I point out real quick, Frank, that there's also a camera in, there's a camera in there so that
right,
somebody comes and goes, we know who it is. So
yes. Okay, I'm sorry. But when we put the flash drive in the little compartment for it, we put a seal on that. That seal is recorded, and it's recorded with the piece of equipment. So that also goes to the assistant administrator. So if there's any tampering with it, they can go back and say, well, that security seal was on this piece of equipment, or should have been. So after we've gone through the public test, then we will take this equipment, part of the equipment, the PCs and all, to early voting sites. The officer for that site will come out with the scanner and certain amount of other equipment. They will check all the security seals on the equipment. Also, there's a seal on the outside, the handle of each piece of equipment. So the officer right there verifies that this has not been tampered with, because there's a seal on the outside. When they open it up, they see there's a seal on the little compartment where the flash drive is in place. So it's very, very secure like that. On election day, it's very similar to that. During early voting, we will pick up the filled up ballot bags. And again, it'll be 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. We'll go to the site. They will have a log sheet. They are transferring it over to us. We will sign for it. We will take it to the old courthouse, and the assistant administrator or her assistant will lock it in a secure room, and we will all log in. That's where it was in the time. On election night, very similar to that, we will take the ballot bags as the cars come in to unload everything. We take the ballot bags and we'll take them to that same secure room and log them as they come in. So everything stays secure. I don't know what else to put in there, but let me just say this. I've worked for 3 different administrators, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat. They're all honest. They're very fair. The guys I work with are honest and fair. I don't know of anybody that I would question of all the people I work with. That's about all I got to say.
Thank you, Frank. And I'll definitely echo that. Working with Chris and the other members of the Election Commission has always been really, really good. Tammy, so I wanted to just sort of zoom out for a second. It's interesting. We've talked a lot about the processes, and there's 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. The Election Commission is made up of 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And that makeup would switch depending on who the majority party is in Nashville. And so we have these sort of built-in protections that are sort of facially bipartisan, but elections themselves they're partisan by nature. So it's sort of this weird dichotomy. Can you talk a little bit about your role as an election commissioner, your responsibility to the voters of Knox County, and just sort of the interplay of some of these issues that we've talked about tonight?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Luke. elections are partisan, and these appointments are also political appointments insofar as the party in the majority gets to appoint 3 commissioners to each 5-member commissioner across in each county, and the minority party appoints 2. So even in that, configuration, there's an expectation of, let's call it advantage, based on who's in the majority. And so that too has a political component, right? Because even if everybody voted along party lines, then you know that the vote's going to be 3-2. So those kinds of realities are there. But one of the things that, even with those realities, there's something about just the eyeballs, right? Just having people that can oversee the process, ask the questions, and get that information out in any way, like to the public or however, they deem fit. And that's a really important thing. And so election commissions, the commissioners are subject to the Sunshine Law. So it's not like commissioners can get on the phone with each other and talk about a matter that's going to come up for a vote or come up before them. That has to be done in public. And that can have both, in some ways that can prevent what might be a collegiate way to kind of accomplish tasks, let's say, because I think, we're all pretty sensitive to that. And so we don't violate that. And so we're not talking amongst ourselves outside of a meeting context. But we do have to work together. For example, just like you're hearing a lot about a Republican and Democrat machine technician, or when we transfer ballots, you have to have somebody, your workers are saying whether they're, a Republican or a Democrat, and those lists get approved by the commission. That's one of the jobs of the commission. So we have to work together to go, let's say, lock boxes, let's say absentee ballot boxes. In this past election, of course, as we all know, we had a high number of absentee ballot boxes, both in the primary and in the presidential election. And so we have to go, we have to figure out how to do that. I'll be there at 5, you be there at 5 or whatever. And we lock those boxes together. So Democrats have one key, Republicans have another key as commissioners. We have seals, similar to what Frank's mentioning. Those particular boxes have seals. And so we are working together to get those things done in that way. And we all have eyes on the process. And then another thing is that you can ask questions. This is something I would encourage all commissioners to do across the state, is that you ask questions and you ask the administrator of elections, and that action alone elevates the game, elevates everybody to operate at a different level, not just because we all tend to, when we start thinking about what we're doing or we have to explain what we're doing, I think we all tend to be a little bit more thorough about it. So I'm not sure if I'm addressing it exactly, Luke. It is a political thing. There are elections. We have Republican primaries, we have Democratic primaries, and we have general elections. But it's also like, whether you believe this or not, my experience has been we are all in it together to run elections. There's a lot of people involved in this process. It's not like a cabal. Now, on a commission in this state, Republicans have the power. Ultimately on a vote, they do. It's unfortunate, and I wish that we would see more cross-party voting, and maybe we will. But we're all kind of doing this together. There's a lot of volunteers. There's a lot of workers, poll watchers, and the employees too in the office. And so there is an effort really to oversee these elections in a way in which we can each individually be proud of what we do, and that we can say that, we're honoring the Constitution of the state. I think we take an actual oath. and that we're fairly administering the election. So in this county, we do a really good job of that. And I don't know a lot of examples where that's not happening. And the guide rails are the law, the administrators. There's just a lot of procedure involved that allows for us all to do that well. It's not just our integrity.
Can I piggyback on that for a second, Tammy? Is that okay, Lou?
Yeah, I think you're having an issue with your audio again. I'll go to Cliff real quick, and then we'll bring you back in, Chris. Cliff, so the integrity of our most recent election was called into question by the president, and we were talking just sort of generally about the type of pressure that can cause on the system downstream, I guess. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and the type of things that can do to people's fears and the integrity of our local elections here? And you're on mute, Cliff.
May I just say something while he's gone? I just cannot believe any state, any election, that there aren't Democrats or Republicans all over the place watching everything. I just can't see it. This huge conspiracy. Nobody's going to let the other side get ahead of them. Nobody's going to let somebody else throw ballots away or tear them up or add ballots to it. It's just not going to happen. That's all I have to say.
And that sort of goes to what Cliff was talking about earlier. If you want to go ahead and pick up on that point, Cliff.
Well, I think what I wanted to get to a minute ago. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Got my technician here with me, having some issues here. One thing I did want to point out to when Tammy was talking about the votes, because a lot of the viewers are not going to know that I bet you 90% of the votes that we have in Knox County are 4 votes to 0. In other words, the Republicans and the Democratic commissioners agree on the majority of the issues. And it's been my experience during the 9 years I was there that when they don't have agreement, in other words, when we have some disagreement, is usually having to do with maybe an early voting location or the hours of operation. That to me has been really and I hate to use the word fights, but disagreements that we've had. That's been it for the most part. We all agree. And Tammy pointed out something else that is really so key to everybody having confidence. The Democrat members of the commission are the only ones that, they'll approve the Democratic workers. And they approve that Frank Shingle is going to be the Democratic technician, and the Republicans do the same. So the parties don't get involved in who's representing that party at the elections. And then you've got these hundreds of election officials out there that are operating together. And for the most part, those election officials get along really well on election day. All this conflict that people think that they have, it's not being experienced by election officials. The conflict at the polling place isn't with election officials with each other. It's with the voter that comes in there that's already mad about something. And no matter what you do, they're still mad about something. So I think it's important for people to understand how well election commissions work together. And I also want to remind your viewers especially that the Democrats were the one that put in place, when they were the majority party, about getting 3 of the 5 election commissioners appointed by the majority party. So it's not something that the Republicans came up with when they took over. I got lots of phone calls because I was the first Republican administrator, in 150 years down there. So I got accused of all kinds of things and it really surprised me coming from federal court where Republicans and Democrats, you see them come and go, whether it's the marshal or the U.S. attorney, and all of a sudden everything I did was looked at through a very partisan lens, and that was a shock to me. And I figured out really quick that again, it's how things look, not, people don't know what your internal motive is. Biggest issue we had early on that I found out about is when I moved our polling place out of Bell Morris School over to the Larry Cox Senior Center because I thought it was more accessible for folks with disabilities. When I got a complaint, well, all of a sudden I was accused of shutting down a Democratic polling place. And so I learned I'm going to get buy-in from the Democratic members of the commission before we do anything. And I know Chris Davis does the same thing, is that we want to be sure that it's not perceived to be something partisan when we're making a move. In polling places, that's when people talk about what do you look for at a polling place, one of the things is accessibility. Is there enough parking? If somebody's in a wheelchair or has a walker or cane, how easy it is to get, because those become partisan issues when you hear that accusation. We've all heard it, that my polling place is not convenient. They are making it where I can't go vote. They are disenfranchising me. And so it was always a major issue to find better polling places. I counted it up today while I was preparing for this, that when I was there, we've moved 17 or 18 polling places. I know you all have moved a couple of them recently, Chris, for this last election. And every one of those moves improved, I thought, the experience for the voters. And of course, my goal was, I've complained about schools for a long time, was to get out of as many schools as I can and go somewhere else, because schools are old buildings and a lot of them, believe it or not, are not accessible for a lot of our voters out there.
And you know, Cliff raises a good point that generally speaking, there is, you know, agreement, but also when there isn't agreement, that's fine. And I think that's part of, you know, I don't know what's that's part of the issue, is that part of the role of all of these different people is to actually say, okay, this isn't working, or I perceive it this way. And that is how democracy functions. And so we're doing it out in the open. The public can come to meetings. And I think it's fine. It's fine to have those disagreements, and it's fine to actually have the debate. And the more that you have that, the more transparency you have. And election laws can be archaic. They do, you know, they arise out of a long history. They haven't always caught up with the times. There is politics absolutely involved in things like what IDs are the legislature's going to agree to. Democrats generally don't share the same rubric that Republican legislatures share about voting. Democrats generally want voting to be easier and more accessible, but debate is a healthy part of the system. I think when we start being unable to actually have it, and then start alleging a lie and then not walking that back, if facts don't support something, you know, we're in trouble. And
So for all of you watching at home, please tune in next week, and we thank you for watching tonight.